BBOR, Black Box Online Radio, coming to you from West Virginia. Recently on this channel, we were talking about John Wayne Gacy, and I mentioned that if you were perhaps to walk up to a random person on the street in America and ask them, like, who are the 4 major American serial killers that you can think of, I was like, they would probably say John Wayne Gacy, Ted Bundy, the Zodiac Killer, and Jeffrey Dahmer. But then I began to think that I really had never covered too much about Jeffrey Dahmer because he's one of the most famous ones in the world. I mean, we know that he is somebody who was a cannibal. He cannibalized his victims. He was also targeting mostly young males, and he was murdered in prison. Those are the things that people would think about when they say Jeffrey Dahmer and they associate it with the name. But I had recognized that I had never really just done a lot of reading on him or watched any of the documentaries about him. So that's what I decided to do. And we're going to have a little bit of a discussion about Jeffrey Dahmer and some of the other things about serial killers in general. The first thing I would say is, back when we were in the Gacy upload, we talked about Dr. Michael Stone and the hierarchy of evil. This is like the 22-level tier system that determines just how evil a person is in terms of their actions. Number 1 is the lowest, and 22 is the highest. And when this was introduced to me back from a professor I had years ago, I thought I remembered him saying that John Wayne Gacy was a 22, that's why we mentioned it last time, but that Jeffrey Dahmer was only a 17. However, I got on NPR's list of this when they're describing Michael Stone's hierarchy of evil, because something about that did not sound right to me. And no, Jeffrey Dahmer is actually listed at 22. He is the kind of most evil form, most kind of sadistic form of, well, a serial killer, murderer, anything of that nature. Perhaps the person who told me that, I might just be misremembering. This was, 16 years ago or something like that. But Ted Bundy was their example of level 17, someone who is sexually perverse with his killings, but not sort of a psychopathic torturer. And also, Jeffrey Dahmer murdered 17 victims, and at least he was convicted on 17 murders, so perhaps the person who was introducing me to Michael Stone might have also made that connection. But yes, I do have it here from NPR. Level 22, psychopathic torture murderers, defined by a primary motivation to inflict prolonged diabolical torture. Most in this category are male serial killers, and their case example is none other than Jeffrey Dahmer. Born in 1960 in Milwaukee, Jeffrey Dahmer was sexually molested by a neighbor when he was 8. At 10, he was decapitating animals and mounting their heads on stakes in the backyard. At 17, he committed his first murder, a male hitchhiker whom he bludgeoned, strangled, dismembered, and buried. And once again, this is from NPR's presentation on Dr. Michael Stone's hierarchy of evil, just citing the source. Okay, though, so what do we make of all that? I would first say that I watched the World Documentaries presentation on Jeffrey Dahmer as well, which is available online for free. They really seem to leave out a lot of things. They were more trying to present him as somebody who was just an antisocial personality, someone who just kind of got off on attention, and he was a very big attention seeker, and this all took place a lot during his kind of his adolescence. But in reality, I mean, if they did say it, they either mumbled it or I didn't hear it. They didn't mention at all that he was molested. And also, one of the big things, though, that I noticed with Jeffrey Dahmer is kind of a distant childhood, not really a lot of connection with his mother. His mother had actually some mental issues, and she was institutionalized. And the thing is, though, I think that shouldn't be something that would be downplayed. I really think there was not a lot of bonding between Jeffrey Dahmer and his mother. And when I'm watching the interviews with his father, Lionel Dahmer, and Jeffrey Dahmer's middle name was Lionel as well, by the way, but Lionel Dahmer, his father, he really just seems kind of nonchalant about the whole thing, and I don't think that that's an accident, because that just sort of seems like not completely connected in comprehending the gravity of situations. I think that was a big issue with his father, whereas his mother was just not really devoting a lot of attention, energy, as well as having that loving connection with her son. And the evangelist who performed the baptism on Jeffrey Dahmer in prison described him as he was almost like a boy in a man's body. And when I heard that, I was just like, whoa, whoa, take a step back there. Because that is a very big thing that we were saying on this channel recently. When we were doing the upload about Ray Bradbury and serial killers. Ray Bradbury, of course, the writer, very famous science fiction, Fahrenheit 451, but he also wrote Dandelion Wine and Farewell Summer, and those were the things that we were talking about. Because he created the serial killer called The Lonely One. And he talks so much about how a serial killer is like the lonely one, the child without love, the child that grows up to be a person. It's like, that's sort of like the way that he presented the concept of a serial killer. A serial killer is a child without love that is forced to live in an adult body. And woo, I mean, when I heard that, in the documentary, though, that was once again by World Documentaries from the channel on YouTube here, I was like, oh my gosh, that's exactly, the pathway that we were going down. A child without love that is forced to live in an adult body. And that definitely seems like something that we had going on with Jeffrey Dahmer. He also said, and by he I mean Jeffrey Dahmer himself in an interview, is that one of the reasons why he committed these murders that he did, once again, 17 murders, mostly targeting young males, cannibalizing his victims, why he did this was because of evolution. The naturalistic order of things, and sort that he thought that, maybe he could be the most dominant thing, putting himself at the top of the pecking order, as well as something else, though, that we mentioned back when we were doing our discussion on John Hughes, another serial killer. And that was that the human brain is evolving, right? And we mentioned the hunter-farmer hypothesis, as described by Dr. Tom Hartman. And that is something where it's more like our instincts are evolving to kind of focus on different things at once. But the reason why they are evolving is, what are they doing? They are sharpening our predatory instincts. It's called the hunter-farmer hypothesis because it's saying that we are hunters, but we are forced to live as farmers, meaning that things like agriculture are not natural. They are man-made. This is, it's pure just evolution. That's factored into evolution as well. The development of agriculture and all that, Neolithic revolution, perhaps you've heard of it. So it's like, we don't really need to do any kind of breakdown on what that is. But the whole thing is that the human brain is evolving. And there are some mild things where the hunter-farmer hypothesis mostly talks about how ADD is a response to evolution, where the human brain is evolving to concentrate on multiple things at once. And for example, this can also be done in a destructive way, because I would sort of say, to illustrate rather, that you have the human brain's hunter, primeval, just kind of predatory instincts are what's really evolving. And I just think that that's something to always bear in mind when you sort of kind of experience the concept of a child who is growing up without love and abuse as well. As we just read off this thing from NPR here, that he was also the victim of abuse, molestation. That definitely kind of plays into the cycle of destructive behaviors. But I don't think the evolution angle should be downplayed with Jeffrey Dahmer, because it's almost just like someone who really didn't have a lot of bonding with his mother growing up was kind of developing this sort of fascination with destruction, and as well as just like the kind of guy who would pick up roadkill and just go into the woods and cut it open just to kind of dissect it, performing necropsies, of course, autopsies on people, but we call them necropsies on animals, and then he would kind of do that to human beings. So it's like, one of the things that he also mentioned as well was cannibalism. I tell you, we talk about true crime a lot on this channel, and I try to watch at least one true crime program every single day, but I actually find that the more time that I spend with the subject, the kind of more sort of emotional I get when I hear a lot of these things, when they're talking about what they're finding in Jeffrey Dahmer's apartment, like a 57-gallon barrel that had 3 torsos in it, mummified hands were in the cooking pots, and I was just like, oh my gosh, that's disgusting, absolutely despicable and heinous. But one of the things, though, that I believe that really drives people toward cannibalism is domination. Because we explored this subject when we did our upload on the Metzgermeister, which is kind of an incident from Germany. But the thing with that is just that it's like it is the absolute largest form of domination. And Jeffrey Dahmer did say something like that. He said if he cannibalized his victims, that they would always be a part of him. where it's like you have so completely dominated a person that you have the ability to devour them, to devour their body and do whatever you want with their bones. It's like, I know it sounds absolutely disgusting, but that's the type of thought process that is going in with this. Now, some of the things, though, about Jeffrey Dahmer as well, is that he was a necrophile. He was very big on having sex with the corpses, which I think is somewhat tied into the domination as well, but also it's also something that is just very antisocial and very perverse. What I believe his attorneys really wanted to kind of concoct is that he was someone who had very intense mental disorders. He was a very antisocial personality. And in the World Documentaries thing they posted, he could not control his necrophile urges, his necrophiliac urges, and that's kind of what drove him to commit these killings. But the problem is, though, that does not make somebody insane and unfit for trial. I mean, especially when they kind of gave the introduction of Jeffrey Dahmer as some guy who committed his first murder. But he knew that he had done something wrong, so he had to get rid of the body in the first place. And he was actually very good at dismembering bodies because, once again, he had practiced so much on roadkill, and he knew exactly what to do. And like he knew just sort of about anatomy as well as working as a former army medic, which was one of the few good things in his life. But the thing is, though, that something like this is that he knew that he had done something wrong. He was completely aware of the kind of right and wrong in terms of the way the justice system would approach it. So what did he have to do? He had to destroy the remains, and he had to keep going. And, Jeffrey Dahmer actually was operating, mostly in the 80s, but I believe he actually killed his first victim, what was it, in 1978 or something like that? So he actually had a rather long reign of terror. And once again, you just have to wonder about how these people keep going as long as they did. One of the victims of Jeffrey Dahmer was even able to escape, and they actually have the 911 call online of somebody calling in saying that, hey, this guy is beaten up and he's butt naked and somebody get him some help, and he had escaped to Jeffrey Dahmer. And this happens all the time with serial killers. I mean, this happened with John Wayne Gacy. This happened with people like Alexander Pichushkin, who had a victim crawl away from him in Russia. Crawl out of his dump site, rather, and goes to the police. Hey, this guy attacked me. And some things are just not followed up. This happens all the time, and there are major sort of holes in the justice system. And you really see, though, with a lot of investigations, the investigators conduct serious errors. They commit serious errors, rather, and then they use their administrative power to cover that up. But one of the things, though, with Jeffrey Dahmer is that it really seems like he was someone whom his parents tried to reach out to him, but they kind of went about it in perhaps the wrong way. And perhaps any time that they did try to reach out to him, everything seemed just a little bit too late, or too little too late. The efforts were not sufficient enough. And in all reality, one of the answers for him would have perhaps been to institutionalize him. But one of the things, though, with Jeffrey Dahmer is that one of the reasons why I believe he was not institutionalized is that he really learned how to hide his kind of psychopathic tendencies, which is what a lot of psychopaths learn how to do. And somebody brought this up to me back in maybe 2013, 2014, when they were just saying, that's almost an inexcusable thing. Something must happen as a kid when they do something, and then someone just lets it slide, and then that individual learns how to mask the kind of darkness and evil that is kind of leading them to becoming a serial killer, because either that or you could just say that the psychopaths and sociopaths just have the ability to just hide their emotions on an expert level. But one of the things, though, about hiding emotions is that as a teenager, Jeffrey Dahmer was really described as an antisocial personality. He was not exactly a class clown, more like a class ignoramus or a doofus, or somebody who would just kind of run up and down flapping his arms, who would just do silly things for attention. On the one hand, there is a dopamine surge that comes from unconventional behavior, which is supposedly greatly exacerbated by alcohol consumption. And that's why people tend to get silly when they're drunk. It's because it kind of releases dopamine in the brain. But when I was watching the World Documentaries thing, they mentioned that alcohol was one of the few ways that Jeffrey Dahmer actually controlled his homicidal urges. And, that's kind of the point that they were trying to make, but most people say that sort of like homicidal behavior actually rises when people are drinking. But, I mean, some people might just need, like, a different type of fix or something like that. You could sort of interpret it that way. And perhaps there also is a certain dopamine rush that can be tied to alcohol. It functions in a bit of a different way. You're all kind of dealing with a slightly different system there. But, he's all about unconventional behavior and antisocial behavior. But they mentioned, though, in this type of antisocial kind of downward spiral that he was going, he never really had a close friend. And this is something that I also noticed when I was learning about the case of Elliot Rodger, the Isla Vista shooter who in Santa Barbara, California. Sometimes it's called the Santa Barbara shooter, the Isla Vista shooter. Elliot Rodger wrote the manifesto, My Twisted World. That was one of the things that really stood out to me when they were first describing him. And he also writes in his own manifesto that he never had a single true friend. And that's just one of the things that you notice. Someone who's completely cut off from society, and they feel, rejected. What's that thing that we've been talking about on the channel for months? How rejection from society, or just feeling rejected in general, is its own mental awareness issue. And Jeffrey Dahmer had a lot of chances. He had second chances, he had third chances. Just sometimes like he was discharged from the army because he couldn't control his drinking. He was somebody who was kind of having some success in the army as a field medic, but just he couldn't control the drinking, so they discharged him. I mean, he was somebody who was, just living homeless on the beach, even in kind of like a non-destructive state, rather. I mean, destructive to himself, but not to other people. But every time, his parents tried to bail him out, they're kind of just slowly pushing him down toward that pathway of destruction. And one of the sad things to say is something like that could actually be somewhat of an enabling move. Granted, though, his parents never would have expected that their kid would have turned into a serial killer by buying him a plane ticket home. But in reality, I mean, some of their behaviors really seemed like they somewhat enabled Jeffrey Dahmer's destructive tendencies. But I think a lot of it really stems from the early years of childhood, where they're like, once again, there's that lack of bonding with the parents, as well as being molested. There's something, though, that I was learning about recently. Please don't condemn me if I mispronounce this or get this term exactly wrong. The term is called latency, where this is really from the years of 3 to 9, like age 3 to 9, a child kind of experiences usually kind of upward emotions. They're very gregarious, very mellow, light, and happy. The ages 3 to 9 are very kind of just light and airy, pretty much. And then once age 10 happens, this is when adolescence takes off, and there are a lot of very intense emotional changes. If you are older than 11 years old, maybe you know what this is like. I can definitely relate to something like that. I had never heard of that before this year, and I'm actually 31 right now, and Jeffrey Dahmer was 31 years old at the time he was apprehended, and I was just like kind of, I don't know, just something kind of set off, and I was like, ugh. Just to imagine, being the age that I am now, and like someone actually went through all of these destructive steps, and I feel rather fortunate in life that I didn't go through what he went through, and especially all of this destructive behavior in a short amount of time, because we see serial killers like John Wayne Gacy who kind of carry on their destructive behaviors into much older, like they become much older. And even if you're going to go back further in time to somebody like Thug Baram in India, who apparently committed his first murder at age 10, so the legend says, and then kept, active in the stuff until he was 75. So, I mean, there's actually somewhat of a small time frame with Jeffrey Dahmer in that respect. He was a very young person to be apprehended, but, it doesn't really make the crimes any worse or less. That's just something that kind of stood out to me. It's like his kind of reign of terror really happened in the 20s. And we've mentioned on this channel in the past that I think, though, that one of the things that is heavily downplayed is like the kind of years between ages 18 to 22, the college years, because I feel that there are just some major hormonal shifts that are going on there as well. We talked about how there is that kind of stuff, like the transition from age 9 to 10, just drawing on personal experience combined with this little stuff that you read on the internet. That is like a very intense kind of emotional change time where your hormones are changing and such. And you know how some people give their kids the sex talk at like age 11 or 12 or something? I used to think that, all right, you also need to get that when you are age 18 And they're just going to be like, okay, your hormones are going to be exploding during the college years, and you're going to be going through some major emotional changes there. And I finally find, though, that we notice a lot of kind of destructive tendencies really come out around age 18. Jeffrey Dahmer was supposedly 17 when he committed his first murder. So I don't think that that is an accident. I really think that there are just a lot of there must be something that's going on with the brain maturation at that time. And supposedly the brain doesn't completely develop until the mid to late 20s. That's why you get your insurance reduction at age 25. I kid thee not. But when we're looking at somebody like Jeffrey Dahmer, you just have all the kind of destructive things coming together at once, but masked in a very, very simple and specific way, when he was able to hide it from a lot of people. He was a very attractive guy. In one of the first conversations I ever had about Jeffrey Dahmer, I was a freshman in college, and one person I was talking to, it was a girl I was actually trying to hit on, and she actually mentioned that she had a friend in high school who saw a photo of Jeffrey Dahmer and said, "Oh, he's hot." She thought he was really attractive. I mean, it's like, and you gotta know, girls like to date jerks or something, but that's like this on steroids. But the whole point is, he was someone who was able to kind of charm people. People were very attracted to him, and he was really able to lure people into his web of deception and destruction. So, what do you think about any of the things that we've said about Jeffrey Dahmer so far, that we could be dealing with some aspects of the human brain evolving in a destructive way? We could be dealing with the cycle of destructive behaviors, or that statement that we mentioned that was tied into the Ray Bradbury upload about how a serial killer is a child without love being forced to live in an adult body. What do you think about any of the claims that we've made regarding Jeffrey Dahmer? Or as well, just that he was a very extreme antisocial personality, but he still knew right from wrong when he committed these murders. Absolutely, an absolutely heinous and disgusting killer. But if you have any comments at all about Jeffrey Dahmer, I would love to hear from you. And if you have anything to say at all about serial killers or just psychology, drop a comment below. And until next time.